Assalamu alaikum and welcome again to another episode of our show, Stairway to Paradise. Today's topic is very interesting. It's women in Islam perhaps, this idea of a cliche, unfortunately, oppressiveness, of course not. Well, why not? Let's discuss all these different things, inshallah. One of the things we also want to focus about today is a particular question within this greater framework, which is, do some, not all, but do some Muslim men oppress women, treat women as inferior subconsciously? And again, I'm not saying the religion Islam, but Muslim men who may not be living up to the religion of Islam. Do some Muslim men unfortunately treat women as inferior, oppress women? Okay, we're back, and episode about women. I figured that the only people in the studio with us here should be women, so that, you know, you can speak up. I think men have been speaking too much for women nowadays, particularly in the Islamic world, which reminds me, you know, of this whole topic. But before I do so, Dara, you're from Canada, and Melinda is from?
San Francisco.
Great. Now, the thing about it is that very phrase, women in Islam, you hear it. You know, what does, honestly, pause for a minute. Pause. Everybody in the audience, just pause. Women in Islam. You could be a Muslim, a non-Muslim watching, whoever. But what does that bring about, honestly, in one word, two words? Nowadays, fear, apprehension,
A little bit.
A misconception they might have about my faith.
Yeah.
That's
I think one of the
perspective.
first things that came into my mind was in Denmark. I walked into a bookstore and they had a book on Cleopatra, and the picture on the front was a niqab.
Right.
She was wearing the
Face
niqab,
veil.
the face veil, and it was like Cleopatra. And it was interesting.
Very interesting. So misconceptions. What else comes to mind? You know, you hear that phrase. Misunderstanding, oppression.
Oh, definitely.
Is that word associated?
Particularly with the veil.
Particularly with the veil, oppression. Again, we're not talking about the faith Islam itself, obviously, because we know there can't be any of that there, and we seek to understand these things by having these shows, explaining why Allah, for example, asked for certain things, why He didn't others. We'll look at that, but we're looking at the Muslim world.
But that's definitely a big misconception, not only in the Western world, non-Muslims, but it's a big misconception among Muslims too.
What is exactly which part?
The oppression.
Right. Okay.
I think it's the internal misconception on how to treat women. That there's sometimes very negative examples of how Muslim men treat Muslim women, which is not Islamic.
But it's not Islamic at all. We all agree to that. But it is out there. And it's in the name of Islam. You know, they masquerade as Muslims in their actions. Their actions are like what? What are some of these examples that we're talking about?
I think
domestic violence?
Yeah,
domestic violence.
That's the first thing that came to mind.
Big
one. Exactly.
Me too. What else?
Some countries
don't be shy. You know, just bring it all out.
So some countries, enforce laws like
women can't drive.
Like women can't drive, or how much women need to cover. Enforcing the niqab, the face veil.
For example, where there's obviously much room for having just a hair veil, you know, or head cover. Exactly, and like the two of you, for stuff like that, other things. How about just an intrinsic feeling of false superiority that a man has? Almost like the man is the norm. I'm going to speak, I mean, alhamdulillah, I try not to do this myself, but I do see this, I'm going to be very honest. A lot of men will treat themselves, make of themselves a norm, a standard, based upon which a woman should measure herself. So judge yourself by our standard. It's almost like you're not correct unless you're like man. And, you know, I mean, does that ring any bells?
Completely, particularly in politics and the political sphere. If you're wearing something girly, you've got big blonde hair, big blue eyes, a little bit of makeup, and you talk in this
I'm not going to listen to anything you say.
No, exactly. You're not respected as a politician, where if you have like a squeaky voice, but if you're standing there kind of like a man, your voice is deeper, you're in this straight cut suit, I mean, a short cut hair, think Hillary Clinton, right? Margaret Thatcher, exactly. You can see the difference as to how opponents will look at you and how even your own supporters will look at you. It's a man's world, really.
Well, that's an example. What's another example? Think about, I totally see your point there, but again, something maybe, and politics is relevant in a general sense, but now to gear towards a more particular angle. What about something else that men kind of make themselves the standard? Like, for example, being rational? The idea that to be over-rational and less emotional is the human norm, and that if you have your emotions, sometimes use them. And you know how there is emotional intelligence. Now, we all know that, like, for example, when a baby starts to cry, or not a baby, let's use, like, how old is your eldest?
My oldest daughter is 6.
She's 6. Okay, now if she makes a mistake, and no, if she, for example, whatever, gets electrocuted, because, you know, may Allah save her, but just a brief, you know, puts something in the plug, and it's wrong, and you've told her 1,000 times, but at this particular moment in time, and she's terrified now. Is this the time to tell her rationally that I told you 1,000 times, and if you put A in B again?
Absolutely not. That's the time.
What time is
That's the time to just put my arms around her and just hold her until she feels better.
Absolutely, and we'll look more at this after the break, inshallah. But what a man would have done here, and that means that he is inferior to a woman, he has less emotional intelligence, would have rationally, I've even said this to my son at one point, but he's only 1 or 2 at this point, so where, you know, you shouldn't have, and I told you many times, and all these different things, thinking that I was being more rational, when actually my rationale at that moment was my inferiority. Anyway, it needs to be looked at again after the break. We'll see you in a minute, inshallah.